Good morning, councillors, and welcome to the Planning, Economic Development and Environment Committee meeting of the 18th of April. I declare the meeting open at 9 a.m, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and their elders past, present and emerging. Now, I haven't received any leaves of absence, but I would like to note that a couple of councillors are stuck in some traffic this morning, so they'll be with us as soon as they possibly can. Oh, sorry, and Councillor Russell did provide a leave of absence late yesterday afternoon. Can I please have someone move that Councillor Russell be provided that? There'll be a motion on the screen shortly. Thank you, Councillor Murphy, seconded by Councillor Power. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously by the councillors in the room, and I'll just slow down a minute so I can let the planning girls catch up because I was going too quickly. Murphy and Power. Councillors, we'll move on to declarations of conflict of interest. Do any councillors have any conflicts of interest they'd like to declare on any of the report items today? There being none, we'll get stuck straight into the first report, which is item 5.1, Infrastructure Charges Incentive Review. I'll hand over to the Manager of Economic Development and City Planning, Mr. David Radish, to speak to his report.
Good morning, councillors. So this report talks to some of the incentives that we have available in relation to infrastructure charges. So like most local governments, there's particular types of developments that we want to incentivise to come into the city, and the report lists those. So what the outcome of this report is, we're providing you an update on how some of those incentives have been taken up. So I'll go through some of them. So for example, we have a current incentive for the waiver of infrastructure charges for hotel developments that are 3.5 star plus. We have some waivers of infrastructure charges available for ecotourism. And we have some infrastructure charges waivers available in 2 economic zones across the city, one being Springwood and one being Beenleigh. The other incentives that we have are not so much incentives, but more recognising the community benefit that some of the charitable organisations provide to the city. One of those being domestic violence, housing for domestic violence, and other non-for-profit charities. So if you go through table 1, it talks about the amount of take-up that we've seen. So you'll see with the hotels there's been very little interest in that, although it is quite a good conversation starter with some of my business executives to when they're going to Sydney and Victoria to talk about the fact that we do have this policy available. The second being in the Springwood and Beenleigh priority development zones. So there's been a take-up of 2 there, one being the Springwood Health Hub and one being an office development in Springwood. The lawful uses discounts, that relates to our centres. So if you're in the centre and you're changing your activity from perhaps industrial activity to a food and drink, and you're not adding any additional gross floor area, we won't charge you infrastructure charges, even though there is a change of use associated with this. So I guess in summary, we have these incentives available. The ones that relate to charitable uses, domestic violence, and the reuse of some of our properties in the centres have been successful. When it comes to some of our other incentives related to probably more of the bigger ticket economic development items like hotels and cinemas and ecotourism, they haven't been as well received. So happy to take any questions. One of the recommendations in the report is that we come back with a revised incentive package. Some early thoughts around that would be when Logan Plan 2025 goes live, we allow for a 12 to 18 months incentive period where people can apply and receive the incentives, but after that we cut it off because these incentives have been available for a long time. We haven't seen a lot of take-up, so sometimes it's better when there's a little bit of a sense of urgency. happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dave. I have a question from Councillor Lane.
Thanks very much through you, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much for the report, and detailing the different breakdowns of was very helpful. The not-for-profit and charitable organisations for non-residential use is one that I'm particularly interested in. We've seen an uptake in the number of charitable organisations that are creating churches in commercial areas, and I think that's not necessarily for the positive of that particular section of the community. Would these incentives apply to them?
Through the Chair, yes, they do apply to them. So the incentive is capped at $50,000. So if a church is building a new building and it's $150,000, we defer their payment of infrastructure charges by a maximum of $50,000. So yes, it does apply to churches.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. I have Councillor Harrimeyer, then Mayor Power.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the council officers for their work on this report. I'd like to preface by saying that I'm a big believer in incentives, and I think the less of a burden we can put on people wanting to invest in our city is a good thing, but with one caveat, and that caveat is that it should be fair. And looking at some of these incentives that are current, and I understand there's going to be a review, which is good, but especially the second and third item on table 1, which talk about incentives in particular development in the economic development zones, and then the third item which talks about another city centre focused incentive. These two incentive programs have deferred a combined over $2.5 million. And when these sort of incentives exist, it gives the perception to many in the community that government's giving preferential treatment to property owners who own property in city centres. Now, that preferential treatment would be on those property owners over property owners who don't own property in city centres. And did some research, and I'll list out some examples that might back that sort of perception. The fact that there's greater land use rights for property owners in city centres provided to them by the town plan. The fact that there's been greater capital investment in city centres and better footpaths, infrastructure and public art than other areas in the city that aren't city centres. And even the argument that there's a privileged suburb-based master planning process that other areas, including the growth fronts in our city, don't get that privilege. So that's a concern for me that perception exists, because I think the unique strength in our city is our suburbs, is our growth fronts. And the suburbs are not places where huge government investment corporations like QIC own property. It's not, multinational huge companies don't own office buildings in suburbs, but people who do own property in suburbs are ordinary families and ordinary people living in our city. And I'd hope that in this review, we take them into account and see what we can do to focus on that unique strength as a city. So my question is, will Council's review of these incentives include consideration of incentives for economic development in city growth fronts and suburbs, as well as city centres?
Through the Chair, yes, it will. The incentives predominantly focused around commercial job generating incentives. So I know particularly in your division, there's some local and district centres that could benefit from item number 3, which talks about the existing use rights. So yeah, it will be considered. So just to circle back, the Beanley and Springwood economic zones were outcomes of the City Centre Summit. So that's why that policy has existed for some time. But certainly we see the value in the suburbs and the strength in the suburbs. So we'll be looking at how we can look at supporting jobs there also.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harrimeyer. Mayor Power, and then Councillor Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the officers for the report. I think the transparency on this report is essential. We're not hiding anything under the table. Everything's up front. What we're dealing with is a very competitive market in the southeastern Queensland area. I know my mayoral colleagues in other cities are very competitive and they want to see facilities in their area, and it's a very competitive market. We're competing. Don't think anything otherwise. And developers who have essential developments, they know that, and they'll go around and try and get a better deal in another local authority. This is why we haven't got facilities in our area, because we don't get aggressive enough. Thank the Lord that we're now getting a health hub in Springwood, because I don't want residents from this city to drive all the way to the city to get an operation when they could be here. Imagine the cost, the petrol, parking, and the inconvenience of having to go to Brisbane or Gold Coast. So I support this. This gives the officers the flexibility. If they see something that's very attractive and needed in the city, then they can compete. If not, they won't. It's up to the officers to make that decision. But clearly, if we're competing, just like the Olympics, you know, they left us out of the Olympics, and we've got an Olympic venue now, but by jingo. You know, the sour grapes that is going on after that, we're competing in every form. We have to be competitive. This just allows us to be there. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Bradley.
Thank you. Through the chair, I won't be talking about the Lord, but I'm a bit disappointed about the nature-based tourism aspect. I'm just curious. I've got two things. So there's the nature-based I want to talk about first. What is being done in that space to try and attract the tourism to our city? So
through the chair, the council will be considering a new destination management plan. So there's a briefing planned this Thursday with that document to go through committee in May. The eco-based tourism, tourist park and nature-based tourism, that incentive from memory is about 6 months old. So that's why there hasn't really been much of a take-up. Yeah. There is interest, and we talk to our colleagues. It's certainly something that we can talk to the industry about, but it's a relatively new policy, so it's not as widespreadly known.
So I suppose going forward, there's a plan for how to get that out there to those organisations.
Through the chair, most definitely. So we have material that talks about all the incentives available in Logan.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. The other thing I wanted to ask, I've got in my present emails a business in a neighbourhood centre asking for some sort of relief with rates and stuff. Is there any incentive that will be considered down the track for neighbourhood centres?
So through the chair, so we're just focused on infrastructure charges, so rates, that's something that you'll talk to Caroline Bugg about.
Yeah.
But building on Councillor Hiramaya's comments, we will be starting to look at those local centres. So if there's a fish and chip store that's turning into a wine bar, they may not have to pay infrastructure charges if they're not adding on additional gross floor area.
Okay, so it's only if they're going to do something else. It's not in the present situation.
Yeah, that's right. But there's also the facade improvement program that can help some of those local businesses out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Any further questions? Councillors, you have a motion on the screen. Would someone like to move that motion? Thank you, Councillor Murphy, seconded by Councillor Stemp. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously. Thank you very much, councillors. Councillors, we'll now move on to item 5.2, which is Infrastructure Charges Review Outcomes Report. I note that this is a confidential report, and we do have an amended recommendation for council to consider. Do any councillors wish to move into confidential for this item?
Can you talk about amended? Have we got a copy of that amended?
We can put it up in, we can put it up in open session because we'll have to vote on it. If you want to discuss it, we'll have to go into confidential, that's all. Yep. Councillor Bradley has moved. Councillor Power is second to move into confidential. Could you please raise your hand if you support moving into confidential? Thank you very much. That is carried unanimously. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I didn't see Councillor Bannon's absence of a hand. Councillor Bannon, did you abstain or vote against? Noting Councillor Bannon voted against, the motion has been carried and the meeting is now closed to the public. Now, councillors, we've now moved back into open session. I'll invite the gallery to return so that we can carry on. Yeah, no, not the original, just the amended. I'll ask for the amended recommendation to be put up on the screen for our consideration. Do I have any councillors who would like to move the motion on the screen? Thank you, Councillor Bannon. Would someone like to second that motion? Thank you, Councillor Murphy. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously, with the except not unanimously. That has been carried by all councillors, with the exception of Councillor Bradley. How do you vote?
Against, thank you.
Councillor Karansky, how do you vote?
Against.
And Councillor Wilcox, how do you vote?
Against.
Thank you, councillors. I appreciate the debate and the very thorough questions on that important report. We'll now move through on to item 5. Sorry, thank you very much, Dave. That is the end of your reports. Do you have any general business for us?
No, I do not.
Thank you, Dave. Dave, does anyone have any general business for the Economic Development and City Planning Manager? Councillor Bannon.
Thank you, through the chair. Just a pat in the back for your team, mate. Like, obviously, everything you do, you get it done, and I couldn't be prouder of you.
Thank you, Councillor Bannon. Thank you, gentlemen. You can go back to work. We'll now move on to item 5.3, which is the Kalinda IT MOU. I note that item 5.3 is a confidential report. If councillors, do councillors wish to move into closed session to discuss this item? No? Excellent. Councillors, as you don't wish to move into closed session, we can't present the detail of the report, which means we don't need to present the PowerPoint because it won't be part of it. We will put a motion on the screen unless you have any questions that do not speak to the confidential nature of the report for the acting director, interim director. No. There's a report. There is a motion on the screen that the confidential report be noted. Do I have anyone to move that report for me, please? Thank you, Councillor Bannon. Do I have someone to second that report? Sorry, that motion, I should say. Thank you, Councillor Hall. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously. Thank you very much, councillors. Great work, Dr. Scott. Fastest report you've ever done. Councillors, so does anyone have any general business for Dr. Scott? I know Dr. Scott doesn't have any for us. Thank you very much, Dr. Scott. Councillors, we'll now move on to item 5.4, which is a report of the Development Assessment Manager. It is for MCU 92022, proposed material change of use for medium impact industry at 66 High Road and 5 Peas Court, Bethania. Do you want me to table the PowerPoint before or afterwards? Thank you. I'll hand over to Stephen Ball, the Development Assessment Manager, to speak to his report, although I suspect that Justin's going to be doing all the heavy lifting.
Through the chair, officers are recommending approval for a proposed medium impact industry to regularise an existing spray painting booth at 66 High Road and 5 Peas Court, Bethania. The subject site sits within the mixed use zone, whereby a medium impact industry land use is impact accessible. The site itself is 3,042 square metres in area over 2 lots. And the existing use on site is the manufacture and hire of gantries. The proposal itself is for a spray painting booth to paint those gantries that are manufactured on site within the existing building. In 2021, Council received a complaint from the neighbour about paint overspray and odour. Upon Council's investigation, it was determined that the subject site did not have approval for a spray painting booth. Hence, this application is seeking to regularise that. Ongoing investigations in the area have uncovered 2 other spray painting operations nearby that were occurring outdoors. They've since been stopped by our land use investigation team. Since then, approximately 3 months ago, Council's received no further complaints about overspray, painting overspray or odour. The proposal itself for spray painting will occur between 6:30 a.m. and 3 p.m. Monday to Friday. There's 12 employees currently operating on site and there's 20 existing car parking spaces. As the application was impact accessible, it underwent public notification for 15 business days. Council received 39 submissions. Of those, 15 were in support, 16 were objections, and 8 were not properly made submissions. The key issues raised were paint overspray and odour. There's a more localised context of submissions, the red being objections, the yellow being support. So officers are recommending approval of the application as the spray painting booth is considered small scale, but also ancillary to the primary use on site, which, as I said before, is the manufacturing and hiring of those gantries. Spray painting itself is compatible within the mixed-use zone with the version 9 amendment that commenced earlier this year to the planning scheme. The spray painting of motor vehicles in the mixed-use zone is now a code-accessible intended land use. Officers consider this spray painting booth to be commensurate, akin to a motor vehicle spray painting booth in terms of scale. The applicant demonstrated compliance with Council's emissions criteria through air reporting, air monitoring reporting, and ensured compliance with the planning scheme as a whole through the strategic framework. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Justin. I have Councillor Kerensky, then Councillor Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Begor. I appreciate you bringing this to Council. Councillors, I wasn't comfortable with delegating the decision to officers, although I have every confidence that officers have conducted their due diligence with regard to this issue. But I requested the report be presented to councillors for consideration. The reason being that I'd received a number of complaints over a protracted period of time with respect to the applicant not complying with their obligations. And the nature of that complaint is that this was in a low impact industry and they were conducting spray painting, and the complaints related to overspray damaging a number of cars. And in addition to that, the employees of the adjacent businesses were worried about their health and that they were inhaling fumes. Council went out on several occasions and I believe cautioned the applicant about their operations. The applicant was slow to respond to those those complaints, and those complaints kept flowing into council and of course flowing into me. If you have a look at the background and the discussion piece, you'll see that we issued show cause notices, then we issued enforcement notices. We encouraged them to apply and make a properly made submission, but we continued to receive further complaints, at which point we instructed the applicant to cease operations. Justin, I do have a question for you at this point. We were requesting air quality monitoring over a protracted period of time. When did we finally get that request for air quality monitoring to council?
Through the chair, it was the end of last year that we received the air quality report.
And what do you suppose was the reticence for the applicant to provide that report? Because we were consistently asking for that report from when residents were first complaining.
Through the chair, I'm unsure, but I suspect there's a cost associated with these reports. Equally, they were very confident in their procedures on site as well. But I'm unsure, Councillor. Thank
you. The reason I wanted to bring this to council is I think it's a reasonable expectation of a business owner. If you've set up your business, you're in a low impact industry, and you feel that you're a neighbour who's adjacent to you isn't complying with their requirements, and you make a complaint to council, that council will investigate. We've found the applicant was not operating appropriately. We've cautioned them. We've asked them to do better and do things differently. To their credit, they have actually put in an application to council, but that only comes after they've actually had their toes to the fire, and I have little confidence about whether this applicant will in fact comply moving forward, because their history demonstrates that they haven't been prepared to work with council until there was no other way for them to move forward. So on this occasion, I will be voting against the officer's recommendations. I'll be voting in favour of the adjacent business owners. And councillors, if you have a look at the map in your report, I'm just trying to find the page now, you'll see where those adjacent business owners and employees operate, and they effectively encircle this particular business. So we're not talking about one complaint made from one business that might have, you know, a bugbear with this particular business. It's been consistent, protracted and ongoing. So for that reason, I don't think it's reasonable to ask for a change of land use to accommodate this one particular business. I think it's more appropriate to ask for this one particular business to comply with their requirements under the zoning.
Thank you, Councillor Kerensky. I have Councillor Bradley, Councillor Wilcox, Councillor Raven, Councillor Hall, Councillor Bennon, Councillor Murphy, Councillor Fraser. Councillor Bradley. Councillor Bradley, take it away.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm just curious how long this business has been operating in this capacity.
Through the chair, they commenced operations late 2020.
Okay. And the show cause notice, according to the report, was the 15th of October 21. Yeah?
Through the chair, that's correct, after receiving a complaint.
And it's the application was probably made on the 11th of March last year. So it's taken, what is that, 18 months to get to this point?
Through the chair, complaint received September, October 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Show cause notice issued October 2021. Applicant came in for a pre-lodgement meeting January 2022. Application lodged March 2022. So
Right.
6 months, 4 to 5 months.
So they commenced business during COVID. Is that my recollection in timing? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Wilcox.
Thanks. So I did have a good research on this, and I think I did see online in our background stuff. I actually saw it online that the show cause was issued in 2020, not 2021. In here it says 2021, but I'm sure online I saw it as 2020.
Through the chair, our records show 2021, but I'd have to double check that.
All right, I'll show you that one later. So with the complaints, have they been basically ongoing since 2020 until what you said was up until around 3 months ago?
Through the chair, so based on the report, show cause notice was issued after the complaint in October 2021. Pre-lodgement meeting, so the applicant was advised to cease operation and lodge a development application should you wish to establish the spray painting use lawfully. The applicant then lodged a pre-lodgement meeting in the following year in January 2022. That was after the show cause notice in 2021. And then the application was lodged in March. Officers advised that spray painting could occur whilst the application was ongoing unless we received a complaint. A complaint was received. In the middle of last year, enforcement notice was issued saying cease all spray painting on site until this application is resolved.
And have they ceased, or are they still continuing to spray paint now?
Through the chair, ceased spray painting.
Okay, because for me, reading this, there seem to be a lot of complaints. Reading the documents online that I read, they seem fairly belligerent, I'd hate to say it, against everything that they've been asked to do. They're putting walls up, trying to stop things from happening and all the rest of it. And then reading the air quality monitoring 2022, and it took them that long. Have we done our own air quality monitoring, or have we just asked them to go and do theirs? Because I would have liked, reading this, due to the amount of complaints, if we actually could have got some done and not just solely relied on them to go and get some done for this instance, with them being requested to do so much and not doing it.
Through the chair, we didn't undertake our own monitoring. The monitoring The report submitted and the monitoring that was embedded within that report was undertaken by Catestone Environmental, which is a report you would have read, Councillor. Catestone Environmental is typically a consultants that we would use for that air quality monitoring. So to answer your question, no, council hasn't undertaken our own monitoring. We have expertise in the council to review those reports, though, and we're satisfied that the report complies with council's noise emission standards. Sorry, odour and air quality emission standards.
Okay. And so since 2021 and then ceasing 2022 or whatever it was, has the booth changed in between then and now to make sure that they're not overspraying and all the rest of it?
Through the chair, the design of the booth, to our knowledge, hasn't changed. That's not to say that they haven't replaced filters in the flue, so the extraction fan, they need to be replaced regularly. There was also we suspected potentially how it was being operated, the door may have stayed open during spraying. So you'll see in our conditions that we've required, obviously, the flue to be, the exhaust fan to be maintained and filters to be changed regularly, and a logbook of those filters to be kept, the change of those filters to be kept. Equally, we require that all doors are to remain closed when spray painting occurs on site.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. You went to one of my questions around the consultant. So my understanding is that council uses this consultant to peer review other consultants when an application comes in. Is that right?
I'm sorry, Chair, I didn't hear your question.
Oh, he's not listening. That's okay. Thank you, Councillor Wilcox, for going to the consultant. My understanding is that this consultant is one that we would normally use for peer review of other consultants when an application comes in. So we're confident that they're reliable and...
Through the Chair, that is correct.
Yeah, great. So for the benefit of the committee, I'll ask the questions I asked in the review of the agenda yesterday. So is there any evidence, have we found any evidence that this business is the source of the paint that's overspraying on other people's cars?
Through the Chair, no. And acknowledging my comments earlier that we have obviously undertaken a review of the broader area and subsequently found two other operators, spray painting occurring outdoors, and those two operators have since ceased. But to answer your question, no evidence that the spray paint is coming from this premises.
And those other ones that you said have ceased, so they don't have approvals then, obviously, if they're spray painting outdoors?
Through the Chair, that's correct. They've ceased and weren't interested in gaining approvals. Okay,
and to Councillor Wilcox's question, when the enforcement notice was issued after an application had been lodged, the applicant was compliant and stopped doing the spray painting on site?
Through the Chair, that's correct. Stopped spray painting on site.
Okay, so that means they would have had to transport it somewhere else or something like that. I'm seeing a head shake from Councillor Kransky in my peripheral vision.
Yeah, through the Chair, hand painting, it's being painted by hand.
Oh, wow, okay.
Not spray painting.
But not spray painting. So that timeline of show cause notice October, pre-lodgement meeting January, and an application lodged in March is pretty swift for councillors' benefits who don't see the flow happen that regularly. I imagine that getting to the pre-lodgement meeting in January with an October show cause probably would have been our availability as much as anything else. Then a 2-month turnaround on application is good. The process from there on out is often slow, and it frustrates residents a lot of the time when, not just in matters like these, but in other times when they see an application go in. I've got one at the moment with the place of worship, and they don't understand why it takes us so long to either approve or refuse an application, because it is just a slow process of, under the legislation, of being able to ask for information and get feedback and response times and all that sort of thing. But it's good to see that rapid turnaround. So I guess the final question is if councillors choose to vote against officer recommendations, what is the likelihood of success in an appeal?
Through the Chair, officer's recommendation is based on, for approval, is based on our ability to withstand an appeal. So, the recommendation is to approve. Therefore, we wouldn't recommend it if we didn't think we could defend it in an appeal.
Okay, so you're saying you can defend an appeal if the submitters appeal against the approval?
Through the Chair, that's correct. That's our position for approving the application. And being mindful of it, it does fully comply with the planning scheme in terms of emissions criteria.
Yep. And on the reverse, if we were to vote against officer recommendations to refuse the application, what would the likelihood of success be to defend that decision?
Through the Chair, I don't have a sort of percentage basis I can give you around likelihoods, but it is our view that this should be approved and therefore it could be defended in an appeal scenario.
Thank you very much, Justin. I have Councillor Hall, Councillor Bannon, Councillor Murphy and Fraser.
Thank you, through the Chair. Look, I'm very mindful of the area councillor's concern, and she's doing the right thing by acting for her residents who have raised concerns about this business. Myself, look, I'm probably on the other end of the spectrum on this. I believe the fact that this business is seeking an approval means that they're trying to do the right thing. You know, they're trying to make everything above board. And it's not easy to run a business. There's a lot going on while you're running a business. So I can imagine that they're trying to get on top of any issues or concerns that are raised to them. I can say that there are actually businesses very similar to this operating in backyards around Logan without any type of approval. This here is an illegitimate business. It's operating within a warehouse and it's located in a mixed-use zone. And they are seeking to do the right thing. They are seeking to get the right approvals so that they can operate normally. There's any business that you have, there's going to be complaints around it. There's a meatworks down the road that receives an abundant amount of complaints, but there's a lot of people employed there. There's mortuary further off that receives a lot of complaints, but you know, it's something you have to live around. If you've got a business near you, it's something you need to live around. At the end of the day, we need to recognise that there's 12 people working here. That means there's 12 families reliant on an income that this business provides for them. So if you do close down a business like that, there's 12 people on unemployment and 12 families that are going to go hungry looking for that. So I'm supportive because this business is trying to do the right thing. It's trying to seek the approvals it needs to operate. It has modified its behaviour when councils come in and says you need to spray inside. They've gone into and considered that. And sometimes you don't know everything. Sometimes when you're starting a business or you're operating a business, the rules aren't laid out there in front of you. And people do try and do their best to get that information, but sometimes council needs to step in and says you need to do this to do the right thing. These people have heard what they've been told and they're trying to do it. They're seeking approval. I believe that we should follow the officer's advice and give them the approval and give them the chance to do the right thing.
Thank you. Councillor Hall. Councillor Kransky wanted to respond to that.
Justin, were you considering shutting down the business at all?
Through the Chair, no, there's lawful existing use rights for the gantry manufacturing and hire. It was about dealing with the spray painting on site and potentially pausing that until an application was forthcoming.
Is their core business spray painting?
Through the Chair, the core business is the manufacturing of those gantries. However, they are all eventually spray painted or painted at the end.
Thank you. So just to be clear, we're not talking about shutting any business down here. My intention isn't to close down the business. My intention is to have the applicant be compliant and to be a good neighbour as the neighbours are being to the business.
Thank you, Councillor Kransky. Councillor Bannon, Murphy, Fraser, Stem.
Thank you, through the Chair. Sorry to put the divisional council on the spot because I usually always support divisional council. It's their division. If these guys now became compliant and have ticked all the boxes and the spray booth is everything it's meant to be, I'm just trying to work out if they've done all that, why we're not supporting them, that's all.
Because my experience to date from information provided to me by adjacent business holders is that this particular business hasn't been compliant or working with council. It's been recalcitrant. And even when council has insisted they modify their behaviours, they've continued. So I have little confidence that they will actually act in good faith. Now, I do accept that we have a process where we can continue to monitor the business and go out to the business, but the land use at the moment is for low impact. This is a material change of use which requires council to make that decision to enable that to occur. They can't do these operations on site currently unless we as a group, collectively agree to allow it. So my vote sits behind the adjacent business holders that have been trying to do the right thing and work through council's processes, who are relying on council to stand up and protect their rights.
Through the chair, so the people that put the complaints in the 16 other businesses, have they been made aware that these guys are going to be compliant now and have been asked if they're still going to complain?
Through the chair, they haven't been made aware. We're still deliberating on the application. So once the application is decided, all of the submitters will get a notification of our decision, whether it's approved or refused.
And if they complain again, that's when we'd become as
Through the chair, that's correct. We have conditions now that we can quite easily draw on: when the filter was changed, how often they're spraying. There'll be a logbook. So the conditions are very strict and enable us to ensure compliance quite quickly.
But if we knock it back, as Councillor the Chair was saying, that's when they could go to appeal.
Through the chair, potentially it could go to appeal.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Bannon, and you make a good point that the conditions in the approval are very strict, and that's how we protect the interests of the neighbouring businesses in Councillor Karansky's interest.
Subject to the business being compliant. For example, having doors open when they're spraying is not being compliant, and if we're not on site to check for that, then we only have one word against the other.
And Justin, just to be clear on that, if something like this does occur, we now, because we'll have conditions, we have a mechanism for which to compel enforcement, whereas at the moment we've got a slow process, a show cause notice and enforcement process. But once conditions are in place, then we have much stricter and enforceable powers. Is that right?
Through the chair, the conditions enable us to go out and prove, typically beyond doubt, that they're non-compliant. So they're strict enough with the logbooks around timings of the spray painting occurring, equally with the filter changes and all the other conditions that we will be able to identify if there is a non-compliance. I'm confident in that with the conditions.
And as always with appeals, there's a risk that those conditions get changed by a judge who doesn't understand the context of the decision.
Through the chair, there is that risk.
Thank you, Justin. I've got Councillor Murphy, Fraser, Stemp and Wilcox. Councillor Murphy.
Thank you. Through the chair, you asked my question, but there's just a couple of others that I'd like to ask if possible, and just for the record. With the submissions and having a look at the map, this business actually backs onto some residential area as well. Have we had any complaints on those neighbouring properties rather than just the businesses?
Through the chair, no. The submitters, as you can see, were on figure 11 on page 36, were quite spread across the region, and that suggests that it is people that come to work in Bethania and the nearby area. But to answer your question, no, we didn't receive any from the nearby residences.
Thank you. And I can't seem to see in the report, but I just want to clarify for the record, this particular applicant is the owner of this property, or are they a tenant?
Through the chair, a tenant.
And lastly, like Councillor Raven has said, moving forward, if we do approve this, because Councillor Karansky is really concerned about this particular tenant not being compliant, even though there could be an approval in place, if we have the approval in place, we have more ability to fine and cease work if this application is in place. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes.
And if we were to try to defend this, if we did not approve it, it could cost anywhere between $100,000 to $200,000 for council money to defend this through the legal system.
Through the chair, that's our estimate.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've just got a few questions about their conditions. So if their hours of work aren't within the conditions, if they say spray paint by can, what does that mean? If they do any of these things that is in breach of the conditions, what are the penalties, or what is the process, I guess? So how does this look? So for instance, say they start spray painting at 4 o'clock when it's meant to be stopped by 3:30, isn't it? How does that work? Or 3:35 p.m. How does that look? How does that work? What does that mean?
So through the chair, we would undertake an investigation to confirm to confirm that. There are conditions in here, they're called a temporary environmental provision or plan, that give them the ability to understand where they're not meeting their obligations under the conditions, be very clear around, in consultation with council, be very clear around how they intend to achieve those compliance. And then we have 30 days essentially to monitor that with them. So we work closely with them to ensure that they can comply. But typically, if they're not compliant with hours of operation, we ask for that to cease immediately, and then it triggers other conditions around this transitional environmental plan.
Does that mean a fine, and how much, I guess? And could you please comment on that?
Through the chair, there's a broad range of enforcement methods that we can do. So Justin has just mentioned about the transitional action plan, which if you refer to page 44 and 45 of your agendas, it has those conditions that relate to those, including the hours of operation for the spray painting activity specifically, which is on 4.7 on page 45. One of those strategies, in addition to that, is also looking at breach of condition and issuing PINs and fining them for those breach of conditions.
If they continue to not comply with their conditions, can their approval be removed? And if that was to happen, like in the first year or so, they'd lose all the fees they'd have to pay and things like that, I guess, as well.
Through the chair, once the approval is given, that remains. We can't remove that. However, the council can go through a process of prosecuting them in order to ensure compliance with those conditions.
So they've got a lot at stake, I guess, to comply with the conditions. So that's all I was checking out. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser, Councillor Stemp, Wilcox, Lane and Power.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. Just a couple of quick ones. Are there any other businesses in the area that do indoor spray painting?
Through the chair, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so we haven't received any complaints or anything in that space, no. And if they're found, if basically there are complaints, but they've found that they're complying with the conditions, but there's still complaints from surrounding businesses with regard to odour, medical conditions, etc., what happens then?
Sorry, so we're still receiving complaints once operation?
Yes, so basically there's complaints received, you realise that you basically have a look and they're complying with all the conditions that we've laid out, but there's still concerns raised by the community. What happens then? What's the next step in
Through
that
the
space?
chair, through the chair, typically it would be then undertaking an investigation and audit of the local area to determine whether there are other sources contributing to that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stemp. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, through the chair again. Since the other two businesses ceased operations with their outside spraying, have there still been complaints?
Through the chair, no.
Okay, so all three ceased at the same time?
Through the chair, the subject application ceased middle of last year. The other two operators ceased approximately 3 months ago.
Okay, and so in that stretch, was there any complaints in between?
Through the chair, subject application ceased spray painting middle of last year. Complaints were received after that, so late last year. Investigation ongoing. It was determined there were 2 outdoor sprayers occurring. They were told to cease operation. That occurred 3 months ago, and since then, no complaints.
Okay, and so in here, we've got spray painting between 9 to 3:30, and you can only do it for 2 to 3 hours a day. Who's going to monitor that?
Through the chair, it would be reliant on if they weren't complying with that condition and we received a complaint, we would investigate. That being said, officers can still go out and undertake an audit every now and then.
And so when officers do go out, do they normally make an appointment first?
Through the chair, not required to, and depends on the situation.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. The great questions about the outdoor spraying in other areas. Councillor Lane, Councillor Power, and then I'm going to wrap it up.
Thanks very much. I was going to stay out of this, but a couple of questions were raised. I can hear the Divisional Councillor's concerns and her reactive responses to questions and comments from other councillors. My concern is the chronology of the application. It it says a number of times that complaints were received and action by council, and I think there's listed at 3. Is there more than that? How many complaints have been received for the site over the period of time, and how many times have non-compliance happened, and how many fines have been issued to the business, please?
Through the chair, no fines have been issued to the business. So the first step was to cease all operation, and that occurred in the first instance. Complaints, 3 sets of complaints. I don't have exact individual complaint numbers, councillor, but those three sets of complaints which caused us to issue show cause notices, enforcement notices.
The only reason why I ask that is because I've seen it happen before where we have a naughty person who's doing the wrong thing, who gets a notice, who stops doing it for the moment, then starts it up, gets another notice, stops doing it. And one of the comments that you made, and this is the reason why I put my hand up, was you said the expectation that we can prove that they're breaching it. And if no fines have been issued during this period and we give them approval to go ahead, my concern is for compliance, we actually have to have physical proof or the officers on the doorstep when it happens. Do we have enough officers to actually cover it if there were complaints coming in?
Through the chair, we certainly do, and the conditions I've discussed earlier are crafted in a way that they are strict, obviously, but they require them to keep a logbook of all maintenance on the spray painting booth and also of when spray painting occurs on site. So that would be our first point of call, and then corroborate that with a complaint. We don't have that at the moment.
And a breach results in a fine, not a shutdown of the business.
Through the chair, as Stephen mentioned before, fine is one tool we can use to ensure compliance. But ultimately, it could affect the business in the long term should they not comply.
So based on the recommendations, we wouldn't shut down a business, we would educate them rather than do anything. Is that probably a better understanding of it, or is that me just forethinking something?
Through the chair, absolutely, we ensure compliance first and foremost.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. Mayor Power, bring it home.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just to say, I walked outside to deal with another issue. I come back and there was 10 people in front of me. So I thought I'd sort of watch the event, and normally I would interfere quite early in the piece and ask the relevant questions. But can I say this? You've got there. I believe you've got there. You've covered off. You've asked the relevant questions. You've obviously the information that's come to you outside the report is here for you to make a decision. I've been in this situation many times as a councillor. I understand the frustration of a local councillor. I understand what it's like to be abused by residents because you're not seen to be doing anything. I understand that. And the problem is the way the legislation is and the way, if, for instance, the council was to take action during the process, if it went to court, the judge would say, all right, we'll allow the applicant to make application to be compliant. And that's from experience, from where we've been on this journey many times, is that you'll see that there's a bit of a lag there because the officers know that if we do take it to court, the legal advice will be, well, make application. The judge will clearly see the application and say, okay, allow them to proceed with that application. And that's very frustrating because everyone's saying, why isn't council doing anything now? Why don't they get onto the job and fix this? I understand that, but the legal process is frustrating. Okay, and I want to go on with the decision here. It's very easy to get involved with the local councillor, and I agree that, you know, she seems to got to be seen to be doing something, and it's the legal process that stops this from happening. The officers have done the best they can because they're talking from experience and they've been through this process many times. I'll be voting for it. I don't seem to be rewarding applications where people have been consistently doing the wrong thing, and you've got complaints. But unfortunately, we've got no other process. The legal requirements are that you've got the officer's recommendation, you would then have to find other legal advice, and it's just, you know, unfortunately the chances of winning is just not there. It's not worth the process. Sometimes we have to swallow our pride and say, well, it's the legal process that's stopping us from getting what we really want here, but that's the process. I'll leave it with that.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just want to note that while there have been complaints, we haven't been able to find evidence, otherwise we would have issued fines. That's the challenge in this space, and there was other people doing spray painting at the same time, which muddies the water even further. Councillors, I have a motion on the board to table the PowerPoint presentation in the first instance. Can I please have someone move that the presentation be tabled? It's a procedural motion, so I don't need a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Stemp. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously. We'll now carry on to the motion for the report as it is on the screen. I'll give you a second just to review it, but it is as per your agenda, essentially report approving the application with the conditions listed. Can I have someone move that motion, please? Thank you, Councillor Hall. Seconded by Mayor Power. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried with the exception of Councillor Kransky. How do you vote?
Against.
And Councillor Wilcox.
Against.
Thank you, councillors. That brings us to the end of the Development Assessment Manager's report. Stephen, do you have any general business for us?
Through the chair, no, I don't.
Councillors, do you have any general business for Stephen? No? Great. Thank you very much, Stephen. And finally, sorry, Michael, I should have asked if you had GB a lot earlier, but you've sat through some riveting committee with great questions. I'll bring you forward. While Michael walks to his chair, do any councillors have any general business for the Health, Environment and Waste and Sustainability as the now manager? Councillor Bradley.
Yeah, thank you. Can I just pass on just this, what I observed? I was walking along Springwood Road with my dogs, as I do, and I noticed the contractor for the recycling bins was going along at the same time, and I witnessed this contractor take someone's bin, not only to and I know the lady, not only to their yard, but put them inside the yard. I was super impressed with that. So can you please pass on my sincere thanks for that? That was pretty impressive to witness.
I certainly will. That very much sounds to me like a medical support service, and that's the expectation for those who do have one of those medical support services, that the bins are taken from the property, out, serviced and returned. So, but I'll certainly pass that on.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Any further general business for Michael? Michael, do you have any general business for us?
I do not this time, Councillor.
Keep up the great work. I know it's very busy in your little neck of the woods at the moment. Councillors, that brings us to the end of the committee. I declare the meeting closed at 10. Oh, sorry, is there another general business that I've neglected? Oh, sorry, for the Director. Any general business for the Director? What's this one? We've got something on the agenda. Future report addressing telecommunications facility being assessed in Logan Village. Councillor Kerensky, has that one been resolved?
No, it hasn't, but my understanding is it wasn't coming up this round.
Okay, all good. It made it to a list, so we'll make sure it comes up in a future round. Thank you, Councillor Kerensky. I declare the meeting closed at 10:25 a.m. The City Infrastructure Committee will begin at 10:35. Thank you, councillors.